My son's blood type was printed in standard black font on a standard beige hospital form. And it stopped my heart, the way nothing in 14 years of surgery ever had. Not the compound fractures, not the ruptured arteries, not the 3 a.m. codes that made your whole body go cold, a blood type on an intake form. That's what undid me, because that blood type, B negative, rare enough, that only about 2% of the population carries it, was mine, and the child on my operating table. A 9-year-old boy named Lucas, who had been brought into Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, California, on a Tuesday morning in the spring of 2024, with a blood clot compressing his motor cortex. That child could not have that blood type by coincidence. Not with those ears, not with that jawline. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's the problem with pain. It rewires the way you tell a story. You want to start at the end, because the end is the thing that finally makes sense of everything else. So, let me go back to 2015. Back to a parking lot in Pasadena, California, and the night that cost me everything. My name is George Rowland. In 2015, I was 34 years old, a third-year resident finishing my fellowship in pediatric neurosurgery at the Hospital of the Good Samaritan in Los Angeles. I grew up in Riverside, California, 40 miles east of the city, the kind of place that smells like eucalyptus and dry heat in August and never quite makes it into the travel guides. My father, Harold Rowland, drove a delivery truck for 40 years. My mother, Ruth Rowland, worked as a school librarian and made the best chili in San Bernardino County, which I say with no bias whatsoever. I was not wealthy. I was not well-coned. I had scholarships, night shifts at a 24-hour diner in Riverside, and a pathological need to prove that a kid from a working-class neighborhood could do something that mattered. Medicine was the answer to a question I'd been asking since I was 12 years old, and watched a doctor save my little sister from a burst appendix with about 20 minutes to spare. I decided that night that I wanted to be that person, the one with steady hands when everything else was falling apart. By 2015, I was close, not finished, but close. I had 16 months left in my residency. My attending physician, Dr. Paul DeGuru, told me I was one of the most technically gifted residents he had supervised in 2 decades. I was not going to tell you that myself, but this story requires you to understand what I had built, because what happened next nearly destroyed every brick of it. Her name was Jennifer Voss. I met Jennifer at a medical conference in Santa Monica in March of 2015. She wasn't a doctor. She was there because her family's pharmaceutical company, Voss Biomed Group, was a sponsor. She was standing near the registration table with a glass of sparkling water she clearly didn't want, wearing a blue dress that made the Pacific Ocean outside look like it was trying to compete, and arguing quietly on her phone with someone who was obviously losing. When she hung up, she looked directly at me as if she'd known I was standing there the whole time. "Sorry," she said. "Family. Is that an explanation or a diagnosis?" She laughed, not politely. Actually laughed. Both, probably. The Jennifer Voss was 31 years old. She had dark haircut short around her face, green eyes that were always doing something even when her mouth wasn't, and the kind of laugh that makes a room feel warmer than it actually is. She was funny and perceptive and relentlessly curious about everything. She wanted to know how the brain worked, not from a textbook perspective. She wanted to know what it felt like to hold someone's life in your hands, and whether surgeons actually thought about it, or whether the thinking got trained out of you somewhere in year 3. It never gets trained out. I told her 3 hours into what had started as a 5-minute conversation. You just get better at holding it parallel to everything else, like driving in heavy traffic. You're still aware the cars can kill you. You just don't freeze anymore. She looked at me for a moment. That's either very reassuring or deeply unsettling. Yes, I said. She smiled. I like that answer. We talked until the conference bar closed. I walked her to her car in the parking structure on 3rd Street. She wrote her number on the back of a conference lanyard because neither of us had a pen, and it was the only paper available. I still have it somewhere tucked in the back of a drawer I don't open very often. We started dating slowly, the way you do when both of you are being careful, when you've both been hurt before and learned that fast and careless are nearly synonyms. By June of 2015, we weren't slow anymore. By September, I had met her friends. She had met my parents. And we had done that terrifying thing where you start using the word we without thinking about it. Her family was a different story. Jennifer's father, Walter Voss, had died 4 years earlier. Cardiac arrest. Sudden, devastating. He had built Voss Biomedical from a regional distributor into a mid-sized pharmaceutical company with national reach. After his death, the company passed to the family trust managed by Jennifer's older brother, Garrett Voss, and the entire Voss family orbit, its social calendar, its business decisions, its opinion of every person who entered or exited Jennifer's life was controlled entirely by one woman, Margaret Voss, Jennifer's mother. The first time I met Margaret, we were at the family home in San Marino, a Spanish colonial revival that sat at the end of a long driveway lined with sculpted hedges and quiet. Expensive indifference. Margaret Voss was 62 years old, and she moved through that house the way a judge moves through a courtroom. Like every space belonged to her by decree rather than circumstance. She had Jennifer's green eyes, but on Margaret, they were cooler, appraising. She shook my hand at the door. "George, Jennifer's told me about you. Good things. I hope. She said you were dedicated." She held my gaze exactly 1 beat longer than was comfortable. We'll see what that means. That was the whole welcome. She turned and walked into the dining room and expected us to follow, which we did because in Margaret Voss's house, that was simply what you did. Dinner was pleasant on the surface. Margaret asked careful questions. Where was I from? What were my plans after residency? Did I intend to stay in private practice or pursue academic medicine? She listened to every answer the way a prosecutor listens to a witness, storing it, categorizing it, deciding which parts to use later. Jennifer's brother, Garrett, was quieter than I expected, always watching his mother before he offered any opinion of his own. I noticed that. 2. I filed it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was not being paranoid. By December of 2015, Jennifer and I had been together 9 months. I proposed on a Sunday evening at Danso Gardens in La Ciata, Flint Ridge, which is a botanical garden about 12 miles northeast of downtown Los Angeles that turns extraordinary in winter. All winter, blooming camellias and rose gardens going copper in the late afternoon light. I got down on one knee beside the lake and pulled out a ring I had been quietly paying off for 4 months. Not a family heirloom. Nothing with a Voss history attached to it. A ring I had chosen from a jeweler on Colorado Boulevard in Pasadena because the setting reminded me of something Jennifer had described once. A particular kind of light she said she'd seen at sunset over the Pacific when she was a little girl. She said yes before I had finished the sentence. We drove back to her apartment in Silver Lake with the radio too loud, and both of us grinning like idiots. And for about 3 weeks, everything felt like the kind of luck you're almost afraid to look at directly because you don't want to spook it. Then Margaret Voss called me. Not Jennifer. Me directly on my cell phone. I was in the hospital parking garage in Koreatown when she called. It was a Wednesday evening in January of 2016, just after 7 o'clock, and I had just finished a 14-hour shift. George. Her voice was the temperature of a walk-in refrigerator. I think we should have lunch. She's going to make this simple. I thought she's going to draw a line and ask me to choose which side of it I want to stand on. We met 2 days later at a restaurant in Pasadena. Not the kind of place with a line out the door and a 45-minute wait. The quiet kind. The kind where the staff knows your name and the tables are far enough apart that conversations remain private. Margaret was already seated when I arrived. She had ordered water and a menu she wasn't reading. I sat down. I waited. She placed a manila envelope on the table. Inside was a set of photographs, printed on good paper, recently developed. 8 of them. They showed me a dinner with different women at different restaurants going back about 2 years. Mostly colleagues. One old girlfriend from Riverside I had dated briefly in 2014. A few I honestly had to think, to remember the context of taken from a distance. Unflattering angles. Out of context, in the particular way that only photographs taken specifically to be out of context can be. My son-in-law, Margaret said evenly, will not be someone I have to worry about. I looked at the photos, then at her. These are dinners. These are colleagues and old acquaintances. There is nothing in any of these photographs. That is what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. She folded her hands. I'm observing. I'm also observing that you have significant student debt, that your family has no material assets, and that my daughter stands to inherit a very considerable share of a privately held pharmaceutical company. I want you to understand that I am paying attention. What would you like me to do with that information? She met my eyes. I would like you to ask yourself an honest question. George, whether what you feel for Jennifer is love, or whether it is the particular relief a certain kind of man feels when someone else's good fortune comes within reach. I picked up the envelope. I put the photographs back inside. I put the envelope on the table between us. I love your daughter, not your portfolio. I stood up. Thank you for lunch. I walked out. I drove back to the hospital. I did not tell Jennifer about the meeting for 3 days because I needed to decide how to tell her in a way that didn't detonate everything. When I told her, she went quiet. Not the calm kind of quiet. Then she said, she did what? She obtained my old photograph, presented them as evidence of I don't know, a pattern. George. She pressed her fingers to her forehead. I'm going to talk to her. Jennifer. No. No. This isn't. She doesn't get to do this. Not to you. She did talk to Margaret. I don't know exactly what was said. What I know is that afterward, Margaret stopped calling me directly, and for about 3 months, she kept her distance with the particular dignity of someone who has decided to wait rather than retreat. I should have known that patience in Margaret Voss was not surrender. Jennifer fell pregnant in April of 2016. We found out on a Saturday morning. A home test. Both of us standing in the bathroom of her Silver Lake apartment, with the kind of stunned, wide-eyed silence that is 95% shock, and 5% the dawning, terrifying sense that everything is about to reorganize itself around a new center of gravity. Then Jennifer laughed. Really laughed. The genuine kind. And I felt the shock dissolve into something that I can only describe as being deeply, overwhelmingly glad. We weren't panicking. We were 34 and 32 years old. I had 14 months left in my residency. We had been engaged for 4 months. We sat on the kitchen floor with coffee going cold on the counter and talked about everything. What we wanted, what scared us, what the next year would look like. We were adults. We had a plan. The call to Margaret was Jennifer's to make. I wasn't in the room. But I heard the conversation end, the tone of it, the way Jennifer's voice went from careful to resigned to flat. When she came back, she sat down across from me and said she wants us to come for dinner on Sunday. Is that good or bad with my mother? Jennifer's expression was unreadable. Statistically, it's early. Sunday dinner at the San Marino house was different from the first one. Garrett was there with his wife, Paula. Margaret had made a reservation's worth of effort. The table was formally set. The food was catered. The wine was significant. She was warm, attentive. She called me George and meant it pleasantly. I ate the food, smiled at the right moments, and felt a specific unease I could not locate or name. Smiling, Margaret was a different species from neutral Margaret, and I did not yet know which one was more dangerous. May of 2016, 14 weeks into Jennifer's pregnancy. I'm in the middle of a night rotation when my pager goes off. Not the hospital line, my personal cell. It's Jennifer. I find a quiet corner between two storage rooms and call her back. George. Her voice is unsteady in a way I have never heard before. She knows about everything. About the amount of my share of the trust. All of it. She had a meeting with the family attorney this week without telling me. And she's George. She's trying to have me reclassified as a secondary beneficiary while she restructures the board. She's saying it's for estate planning purposes. Can she do that? Garrett will vote with her. He always votes with her. Jennifer. I kept my voice steady. That's a legal matter. We'll talk to an attorney on Monday. Tonight. I need you to breathe. Okay. Nothing is happening tonight. A pause. Then she told me something else. What long pause? She said that if I go through with this pregnancy with you, she cannot guarantee what will happen to the company's relationship with the Medical Board Review Committee that handles hospital credentialing in California. A beat. George. She has people on that committee. The blood left my face. I stood in that hallway between two storage closets and understood with absolute clarity what Margaret Voss was telling me. That my career, my license, my future was a variable she was willing to adjust. I went home that night. I did not tell Jennifer what I was feeling because what I was feeling was fear, and I knew that if she saw it, she would fold for my sake. Jennifer was that kind of person. She would sacrifice herself to protect the people she loved and think it was a reasonable trade. I called my father instead. Harold Rowland, retired, 61 years old, watching the 11 o'clock news in Riverside, when his son called and told him that the woman holding the keys to his entire professional future had just quietly pointed them at his face. Son, my father said after I finished, have you asked Jennifer what she wants? She wants us, Dad, but I don't think she understands how far her mother will go. Then you need to make sure she understands, and then you need to trust what she decides. 3 weeks later, in early June of 2016, Jennifer and I met Margaret one final time. I asked for the meeting. I called Margaret directly and told her I wanted to talk. The three of us together in the same room. We met at the San Marino house on a Saturday afternoon. Margaret was in a cream linen blazer and had clearly decided the meeting was already over before I sat down. I did not shout. I want that on record. I sat down across from Margaret Voss, and in the calmest voice I could construct, I told her that I understood what she'd done and what she had threatened, that I respected the love behind it, even if I could not respect the method, and that her daughter and I were going to raise our child together, regardless of what she decided to do with her committee contacts or the family trust. Margaret listened. She clasped her hands in her lap. When I finished, she looked at Jennifer. Not at me. At Jennifer. I hope, she said quietly, that you know what you're choosing. Jennifer reached over and took my hand. I do. Margaret nodded once. She stood up. She left the room. We sat in that beautifully appointed living room in San Marino for about 45 seconds before Jennifer exhaled and said, "Well, that happened. We drove home. We ordered pizza. We watched something forgettable on television and fell asleep on the couch." And I thought, maybe that was it. Maybe she heard us. Maybe it's done. I didn't know it yet. But that was the last peaceful evening of my old life. 2 weeks later, late June 2016, Jennifer went into labor 6 weeks early. I was in surgery, 22 floors above the labor and delivery ward, performing a procedure on a 7-year-old boy from Glendale with a brainstem cavern, when one of the nurses stepped into the O and said my name. I cannot leave mid-procedure. Any surgeon knows that the child on my table did not have the option of being someone else's emergency. While I ran downstairs, I finished. I handed off. I scrubbed out. 41 minutes. That is how long it took. I took the elevator to the labor and delivery floor and walked toward the nurses' station at a pace that is technically not running in a hospital, but functionally, physically, nearly running. A nurse I didn't recognize looked up. Then she looked away. That's when I knew a doctor I had never seen before. Young. Uncomfortable in the way residents are uncomfortable when they're about to deliver news they haven't delivered many times yet. Came toward me with his hands clasped in front of him. "Mr. Rowland." "Dr. Rowland." I did not know why I said that. It came out automatically. "Dr. Rowland," he cleared his throat. I'm deeply sorry to tell you this. Miss Voss experienced a severe placental abruption. We did everything we could, so she didn't survive." The corridor went quiet in a specific way, not silent. The background hospital noise continued. Call bells, distant monitors a cartwheeling somewhere, but the words landed inside a bubble of total stillness. "The baby," I said. "The infant was delivered via emergency cesarean." He paused. He was very premature. Dr. Rowland, 34 weeks, and the abruption had compromised his oxygen supply. He survived the delivery, but his condition deteriorated rapidly. We were unable to stabilize him. I'm so sorry. He passed approximately 2 hours after birth. I stood there. "I want to see them," I said. "Of course. There are some steps we need to. I want to see my fiancée and my son." The pause that followed was barely a second, but it was a second too long. He snorts, said something about the family having already about protocols about Margaret Voss having been present and having signed the relevant paperwork. "Margaret Voss is not the next of kin," I said. My voice was completely flat. "I am the listed emergency contact. I am the child's father. I want to see them." More discomfort. A supervisor was called. And then, 2 hours into a conversation, I can barely reconstruct because my brain was operating on some distant mechanical frequency. That is apparently what shock sounds like from the inside. I was told that Jennifer's body had already been transferred per the family's instructions to a funeral home in Arcadia, that our son's remains had been handled similarly, that there was nothing procedurally at this hour that could be done. I drove home to my apartment in Los Feliz. I sat on the floor in the kitchen for a long time. I don't know exactly how long. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable. And remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. The funeral was held at a cemetery in Arcadia, California, Live Oak Memorial Park, off Los Tunas Drive on a Thursday morning in early July of 2016. There was one headstone, white marble. 2 names. Jennifer Marie Voss, beloved daughter. April 3rd. 1984, June 27th, 2016. Baby boy Roland Voss. June 27th, 2016. Margaret Voss stood at the grave in a black dress and sunglasses and accepted condolences from a line of people I didn't know. When I arrived, she looked at me once, and the look said everything that needed to be said. This is mine. This grief belongs to me and my family. You are peripheral. I did not make a scene. I stood at the grave and talked to Jennifer in my head. I told her son I was sorry I didn't get there in time. I told her son I was sorry I never got to hold him. I told them both I would figure out what to do next, which was a lie, because I had no idea what to do next. I went home after the service. I did not eat for approximately a day and a half. Margaret sent a single text message that evening. I think it is best for everyone if you allow us to grieve privately. Jennifer would have wanted peace. I stared at that text for a very long time. Jennifer would have wanted peace from the woman who had spent 6 months making peace impossible. I put the phone face down on the counter and decided in that moment that I was going to do the one thing Margaret Voss could not prevent. I was going to become the best pediatric neurosurgeon in California. I was going to be so good at the one thing she couldn't touch that whatever else she took, and she had taken everything else, it wouldn't be enough. I didn't know it yet. But Margaret Voss had made one catastrophic mistake. She assumed that because she had taken everything from me, I had nothing left to fight with. She forgot what I did for a living. I put people back together. Grief, in my experience, does not go away. People will tell you it does. They mean well. They've either been lucky enough not to test the theory, or they've confused going away with becoming something you can carry without dropping. I didn't go away from my grief. I went deeper into it and built something on the other side. By the fall of 2016, 3 months after that cemetery in Arcadia, I was back in the hospital. Not because the hospital fixed anything, because the hospital was the only place where the particular shape of my loss had somewhere useful to go. When you are standing over a child in a surgical field with 2 millimeters of margin between a successful outcome and a catastrophic one, you cannot be somewhere else. The brain does not permit it. And for a while in those early months, that enforced presence was the only peace I could find. Dr. Paul Degroot gave me room. He didn't make me talk about it. He redirected extra procedures to me, the technically demanding ones, the cases that required absolute focus, and I think he understood that what I needed was something hard enough to climb. I completed my residency in October of 2016. I passed my boards. I joined the attending staff at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles in January of 2017. Over the next 7 years, I built the career I had promised myself in that kitchen floor in Los Angeles. By 2024, I was the head of pediatric neurosurgery at Cedars-Sinai, one of the top-ranked neurosurgical programs on the West Coast. I had published 41 peer-reviewed papers. I had a wait list. I had a reputation that, by the time it reached parents of critically ill children across 3 time zones, had become something close to a last resort, and something close to a miracle, which in medicine are nearly the same thing. My personal life was a different story. I had a nice apartment on Fountain Avenue in West Hollywood, a 6-year-old golden retriever named Murphy, who had the emotional intelligence of a gifted therapist and the bladder control of an amateur. I had colleagues I respected, and a few I liked enough to call friends. I had Dr. Renee Carter, a cardiologist. Brilliant. Funny. Perpetually exasperated by her ex-husband in Los Angeles traffic in equal measure, who had been trying to set me up with anyone, for about 3 years running. There is a woman in my yoga class. She told me one Friday in the hospital cafeteria, a real human woman. George, with a personality and everything. I don't do yoga. She doesn't do yoga either. She just goes for the social anxiety of being in a room where everyone is pretending to be calm. I'm good. Renee, you are demonstrably not good. You have the emotional openness of a closed claim. That's not a saying. I made it a saying. George. She sat down her coffee. You've been alone for 8 years. That's not grieving anymore. That's a lifestyle choice. She wasn't wrong. I knew she wasn't wrong. I just didn't know how to want something again in that particular direction, without it feeling like I was replacing something that hadn't left. In March of 2023, 7 years after Jennifer's death, I started receiving emails. The first one came to my personal account. No subject line, no text, just a photograph embedded in the body of the message. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, on a beach somewhere. Santa Monica. Possibly. The pier lights were visible in the background. He was grinning at the camera, with the full body confidence of a child who has never considered the possibility that the world might not find him delightful. I stared at the photo for a long time. My first thought, spam. A misdirected email. A stranger's child. I marked it as junk. 2 weeks later, another email. Same account. No name. Just a string of letters and numbers at a free email provider. Another photograph. The same boy. A year or so older. A birthday party somewhere. Balloons. A cake. Still grinning. I did not mark this one as junk. Over the next 9 months, 12 photographs arrived. Irregular intervals. Sometimes 2 weeks apart. Sometimes 2 months. Always the same child. Growing slightly older with each image. No message. No name. No context. Just the boy. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself someone had the wrong email address and hadn't noticed yet. I told myself a lot of things and believed none of them. I reported the emails to the hospital's cybersecurity coordinator, a methodical man named Dave Puit, who took data breaches with the intensity of someone personally offended by unauthorized access. Dave traced the email account through 2 proxy servers and came back with nothing actionable. Whoever's sending these, he said, doesn't want to be found, but they keep sending. Yeah, he looked at the photos on my screen. They definitely want to be seen. The photograph stopped in December of 2023. Just stopped. No final message. No explanation. I spent 3 weeks checking my inbox with an urgency I couldn't justify and found nothing. I told myself it was done. I put it in a compartment. I went back to work. In February of 2024, my colleague, Dr. Sandra Kim, a pediatric oncologist, mid-40s, the most competent person I have ever met at explaining terrible news to the parents of sick children, stopped me in the hallway outside the imaging suite. Hey, you have a patient coming this afternoon from Children's Hospital of Orange County. A 9-year-old referral came in this morning. Brain scan shows a subdural hematoma with active compression on the left motor cortex. How bad? Bad enough that they want you specifically. The family, or whoever's with him, asked by name. That registered, but only as a minor oddity. My name circulates in referral networks. It happens. Who's the guardian? Sandra glanced at her tablet. Record shows a Margaret Voss. I stopped walking. Sandra looked up. You know her? The hallway around me went very specific and very quiet. Sandra, I said, and my voice came out evenly, which impressed me honestly. What's the patient's name? She looked at the screen. Lucas. Lucas James Voss, 9 years old. My vision narrowed slightly at the edges. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in the movies with blurring and tunnel effects. Just a small, precise contraction of focus, as if my brain was redirecting all available resources to the task of processing what I had just been told. Lucas James Voss, 9 years old, born in 2015, brought to me specifically with Margaret Voss as guardian. He should have been 8, I thought. 8 years old. Born June of 2016. But if he survived, if he wasn't premature at all, if the birth records were manipulated, if he was born in December of 2015, then he could be 9. George Sandra was looking at me. Sorry. I cleared my throat. Get me the complete file. Blood type, birth records, everything on the intake form. I already sent it to your tablet. Good. I started walking. What's his window? 2 hours. I didn't know it yet. But the next 2 hours would rewrite the last N years of my life. I went to a supply closet. I know that sounds clinical. I went to a supply closet on the 3rd floor, closed the door, turned the light on, and stood there for 60 seconds with my hands pressed flat against the metal shelf in front of me. Lucas. James Voss, 9 years old, blood type B, negative. I'd looked it up on my tablet. At the moment Sandra walked away, B negative, 2% of the population. The exact blood type I had confirmed in my own records 100 times over the years, without ever quite being able to let go of why I kept checking. I could be wrong. I had been wrong about things before. I was a scientist. I understood the difference between correlation and causation, between a pattern that means something and a pattern that your grief has manufactured because it needs somewhere to go. But I also knew those ears in the photograph on my tablet. The intake photo from the ER. I could see the boy's profile as they positioned him for imaging. And the ears, the shape of them, the way the helix curved. Those were my father's ears, Harold Rowland's ears, the ears I had grown up seeing across a kitchen table in Riverside. I straightened up. I washed my hands. I went to the O. I am a surgeon, whatever was happening, whatever this meant. There was a child who needed surgery. The rest of it could wait 60 minutes. The procedure was precise and without complication. The subdural hematoma was accessible via a burr-hole approach. I chose a minimally invasive technique that I had been refining for 3 years, and the clot was evacuated cleanly without damage to the surrounding cortical tissue. I monitored his motor-evoked potentials throughout. They held. When I closed and stepped back from the table, my resident, Dr. James Whitfield, said, "That was clean. Let's hope it stays that way." I stripped my gloves. I'll do the family consult. I walked into the surgical waiting area, and Margaret Voss was already standing. She was 71 years old. 8 years had moved through her carefully. Her hair was fully white now, and there were new lines around her mouth, but she carried herself with the same self-possession I remembered from that dining room in San Marino. She was wearing a gray blazer and holding a cup of coffee she hadn't drunk. She saw me. Something crossed her face. Not guilt, not quite fear. Something more complex than either. The expression of a person who has been expecting a specific reckoning and is now calculating whether the moment has arrived. "Dr. Rowland," she said. "Mrs. Voss." I kept my voice level. "Lucas came through surgery. The clot has been evacuated. We'll monitor him closely for the next 24 hours, but the motor pathway appears intact. He should make a full recovery." She exhaled, for a fraction of a second. The armor came down and she was just a grandmother who had been terrified. Then the armor came back up. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Can I ask who Lucas's parents are?" The pause was less than a second. "But I am trained to read pauses. His mother passed away," she said. "His father is not in the picture. What was his mother's name?" Another pause. Her eyes held mine. "Why do you ask standard follow-up medical history?" She searched my face. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't find it or found too much of it. Jennifer, she said finally. Her name was Jennifer. The waiting room continued around us. A television in the corner was playing local news at low volume. Someone's child was crying softly, 2 rows of seats away. "Thank you, Mrs. Voss," I said. "Someone will come and get you when Lucas is settled in recovery." I turned and walked back through the double doors and did not breathe properly until I was through them. I called Dave Puit from a conference room on the 6th floor. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "Off the clock. Define off the clock. I need you to pull the original death record in Jennifer Marie Voss. Date of death, June 27th, 2016, Los Angeles County, and a companion infant mortality record for the same date. Same surname. Can you access those public records? Yes. What am I looking for? Anomalies, anything that doesn't line up the hospital of record, the attending physician's name, the certifying official. Run all of them. How fast do you need this yesterday?" Dave, he called me back in 2 hours. I was sitting in my office on the 4th floor, not working on anything useful. George. His voice had a specific quality I hadn't heard before, careful, measured, like someone approaching something that might be unstable. The attending physician named on Jennifer Voss's death certificate. A Dr. Philip Henning. He's not in the California Medical Board's licensing database. No active license. No record of disciplinary action because there's no record of the license to begin with. I leaned forward. He doesn't exist. Not as a licensed physician in California. No. There's a Philip Henning who was an administrative coordinator at a hospital in Orange County around that period. Not a doctor and the certifying official. Pause. Retired from the county health department the same year. Pension funded through. Here's the interesting part, a philanthropic endowment administered by the Voss Family Foundation. I sat very still. "Dave," I said. "The infant mortality record, same attending physician, same certifying official." I put the phone down. I stared at the wall. She didn't just take them from me. She forged documents. She bribed a county official. She used an unlicensed person to certify a death. And then she buried an empty coffin and sent me a text message about Jennifer wanting peace. I need to tell you what happened next in the right order, because the order matters. I did not go storming into Margaret Voss's waiting room. I did not call the police that afternoon. I did not make a single dramatic move in the hours after Dave Puit gave me that information. And I want to explain why, because I think some of you might expect that's what you do. And I understand the impulse. But I had spent 9 years becoming excellent at something that requires the absolute suppression of reaction in favor of process. You do not cut in medicine before you know exactly what you are cutting. You do not move before you understand what you are moving toward. And I needed one more piece of information before anything else happened. I needed to know whether Jennifer was alive. Jennifer had a best friend from college, a woman named Brenda Calloway, who had been at the engagement party in December of 2015, who had held Jennifer's hand through the first trimester of the pregnancy, and who had shown up to the funeral at Live Oak Memorial Park and cried with the specific grief of someone who had lost a person rather than a concept. I had lost contact with Brenda in the years after the funeral. Not deliberately. We had exchanged a few texts in the first months, and then the silence that accumulates around grief had swallowed the connection. But I had her number still in my phone, exactly where I'd left it. I called her from my car in the hospital parking structure. Engine off. At 7:14 on a Tuesday evening in February of 2024, she answered on the 4th ring. "Hello, Brenda. It's George Rowland. I don't know if you remember me, George." Her voice changed immediately. The way voices change when something complicated is happening, that they expected to happen eventually. Oh, God. George. That's when I knew. She's alive, I said. Not a question. A long silence. Brenda. George. Her breath went ragged. I didn't know for years. I swear to you, I didn't know. I cried at that funeral. I cried real tears. I thought she was dead. 2. When did you find out 3 years ago? She called me from. I don't know where from. I didn't ask. She was crying so hard I couldn't understand her at first. And then she said her name, and I thought I was losing my mind. Why didn't you? She begged me not to tell you. She said Margaret had made certain arrangements and that if I contacted you, it would be bad for you, for your career. She still believed that. George. She'd spent 4 years being told that you were better off without knowing. The parking structure was very quiet. Do you have a way to reach her? She calls me from different numbers. I never know when. But she, Brenda, paused. She sent me something. 6 months ago asked me to hold on to it in case. Another pause, in case something happened with Lucas. My throat closed. She knows about Lucas. I managed. She knows everything. She's known where he is the whole time. She's the one who's been sending you the photos. She sent me those photographs. Every one of them. 12 photographs over 9 months. Her way of making sure I would see him. Making sure that when the time came, when something happened that brought Lucas to a hospital, I would recognize him. She had been planning this for years alone. Give me whatever she sent you, I said. Brenda read me a phone number. I dialed it from the parking structure because I was not going to drive anywhere. I was not going to move until I heard her voice. It rang 7 times. I counted then. Hello? Jennifer's voice. I have operated on children with burst aneurysms. I have told parents that their child is not going to wake up. I have done things in operating rooms that require a steadiness that most people will thankfully never need to find. And none of it prepared me for the sound of a voice I had been listening to in my memory for 9 years, coming through a phone speaker in a hospital parking structure in Los Angeles. Jennifer, I said. A sound from her end. Something between a breath and a word that doesn't have a name. George. Her voice was steadier than I expected. She had been rehearsing this. I realized she had been ready for this moment in ways I wasn't. Is Lucas. He's out of surgery. He's going to be okay. The sound she made then was the most honest sound I have heard in my life. She told me everything. Not in one conversation. In 4. Spread over 3 evenings while Lucas recovered in the pediatric neurology unit at Cedars-Sinai, and Margaret Voss set vigil in the family waiting room, 1 floor below. Unaware that the woman she had buried was speaking to the man she had tried to erase. Jennifer was living in Sacramento. She had been there for 6 years. Before that, she had moved twice, once to Portland, once briefly to Albuquerque. The geography of a person who was trying to be small enough that a powerful family in a city they owned couldn't locate her easily. Here is what Margaret Voss did. After Jennifer's emergency delivery in late June of 2016, Lucas was born premature, but healthy. Small, but not critically so. Margaret had acted within a 4-hour window. Jennifer was still in post-surgical recovery, sedated from the emergency cesarean when Margaret had spoken to the attending physician. Not the real attending. The administrative coordinator she had apparently been cultivating for exactly this kind of purpose. A man with a medical title he had no license to claim, and a significant need for money that the Voss Foundation was well positioned to address. The death certificates were signed. 2 of them. The county official. A man 3 months from retirement with a pension that had recently begun to worry him. Affixed his seal. By the time Jennifer woke up from sedation in a private room with no window, she was legally dead. Margaret had sat beside her bed. Jennifer, her voice, Jennifer told me, was not the cold boardroom voice. It was something Jennifer had almost never heard before. Soft, close to genuine. I have done something that you are going to be angry about, but I need you to listen to what I am going to tell you before you say anything. She told her that George had come to the hospital, that he had been present briefly in the corridor outside the delivery ward, and that when he was told about the complications, he had said something. Margaret said he had said, "I can't do this. Not now. Not like this." And that he had left the hospital and not returned. She told Jennifer that the baby had been safely delivered. Healthy. Small, but healthy. And that she, Margaret, had ensured arrangements were made that would protect the child from the unstable situation his parents' relationship had become. She told Jennifer that the death certificates were for Jennifer's protection, that George, as a licensed physician, had certain legal rights that could become complicated, that this was temporary, only temporary, while things were sorted out properly, that Jennifer could disappear for a while, heal, and then they would figure out the right way to approach things. Jennifer, sedated and in shock, and having just been told the man she loved had walked out of a hospital corridor while she was in surgery, Jennifer believed her. "She told me you left," Jennifer said to me on the phone, her voice very quiet. She described it in enough detail that I didn't think she could have made it up. She described the coat you were wearing. She said, "You looked at the nurse's board with her name on it and just turned around, and I thought, I was in surgery." But my voice cracked on the last word, and I didn't try to prevent it. "Jennifer, I was in the O. I got there 41 minutes after you delivered. I demanded to see you both. They told me you were already gone." "I know," she said. "I know that now. I didn't know it for 2 years. 2 years. Jennifer spent 2 years in relative isolation. First at a family property in Rancho Mirage, then at a rented house in Portland, believing that I had seen her name on a hospital board and walked away, that the relationship had not survived the weight of real difficulty. Lucas was raised for those 2 years by a nanny Margaret had hired, a kind, steady woman from Fresno named Gloria Navarro, who had no idea about the circumstances and simply cared for a small boy the way she had cared for children her whole professional life. Jennifer saw him on weekends. She was his Aunt Ellie. She told me that in a voice that cracked down the middle. Then 2 years after the birth in June of 2018, Jennifer found the records. She was at the San Marino house for a scheduled visit with Lucas and had gone into Walter Voss's old study looking for a book. In the bottom drawer of the desk, the locked drawer which she had found the key to in a box of her father's things, she found a folder. Inside the folder were the falsified death certificates, her own and her son's, and a handwritten receipt in Margaret's handwriting for a payment of $40,000 to a Philip Henning. Jennifer photographed everything on her phone in that study. Then she walked out of the house, strapped Lucas into his car seat, drove to Brenda Calloway's house in Culver City, and sat on Brenda's kitchen floor and shook for approximately 2 hours. Then she tried to reach me. She called the hospital. My name by then was not difficult to find. I was on the Cedars-Sinai website, the pediatric neurosurgery department page, complete with a biographical note and a contact email. She emailed. She called the department line. She sent a letter to the hospital address. None of it reached me. It took another year before she realized that the emails were being blocked. The hospital contact form routed to a general intake system, and at some point, someone or something was filtering my name out of the results. The letter was never delivered to the department. It took 2 more years before she accepted that she was not going to reach me through any channel that Margaret Voss could monitor or influence. So, she made a different plan. She sent the photographs from an untraceable account. She sent them to my personal email, the address Brenda still had from years ago. She sent 12 photographs over 9 months. She stopped when Brenda told her it might be frightening me rather than preparing me. She waited. She knew Margaret's health had been declining. She knew that if anything happened to Lucas, any medical emergency that required a specialist, Margaret would, out of love for the boy, seek out the best available option. And Jennifer knew my name. She knew my reputation. She had been waiting for me to walk into a room where her son was. I want to take a moment here to be clear about something. I was angry. I was enormously bone-deep angry, in a way that required the same suppression technique I use in operating rooms, because anger without direction is just damage. And I had a very clear sense of what direction I wanted to aim this one. But I also want to tell you something I did not expect. I was angry at the right person, not at Jennifer, who had been manipulated while sedated and in shock and was 22 weeks into her first postpartum recovery, not at Brenda, who had kept a secret she'd been asked to keep by someone she thought she was protecting, not even at Garrett Voss, who I would later learn had been told a carefully edited version of events and had not known the full extent of what his mother had done. I was angry at Margaret Voss cleanly, specifically, and entirely, and I had something she had never expected me to have. I had 9 years of documentation. Here is the thing about forged death certificates in California. Under California Penal Code Section 115, filing a false or forged instrument with a public office is a felony. Under Health and Safety Code, Section 103-800, falsifying vital records, birth records, death records, certificates of fetal death, carries criminal penalties, including imprisonment. The involvement of a county official in the falsification adds charges under government code. Section 1090 concerning conflicts of interest in public office. The payment to Philip Henning constitutes bribery of a public official and conspiracy to file false instruments. These are not minor administrative issues. These are the kind of charges that, presented to a district attorney with the right documentation, open a criminal investigation. I know this because after I spoke to Jennifer the second time, the night of Lucas's second day in recovery, I called an attorney. Her name is Karen Aldridge. She is a civil and criminal litigator based in Westwood, Los Angeles, who has spent 22 years practicing family law and civil fraud litigation. Renee Carter's ex-husband had used her in their divorce and lost badly, which is how Renee knew to recommend her. I met with Karen at her office on Wilshire Boulevard at 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning. I brought the documentation Dave Puit had compiled. I brought the photographs Jennifer had taken in her father's study, which Jennifer had emailed to me the night before, along with scans of every document in the folder. I brought a written account of everything. Karen read for 40 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up. "George," she said, "I want you to understand something before we discuss next steps." "Go ahead." "What Margaret Voss did constitutes multiple serious felonies under California law. We have the documentation to support a criminal referral to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. We also have grounds for a civil action for fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and deprivation of parental rights." She set the folder down. "But I want you to think carefully about what you want, because once this starts, it does not stop." "I know what I want," I said. "I want my son." Karen nodded once. "Then let's talk about how we get him." the first thing we did was file an emergency petition for paternity establishment and custody modification in Los Angeles Superior Court. Under California Family Code, a biological parent who has been fraudulently denied contact with a child has legal grounds for emergency relief when the circumstances can be documented. We had documentation. The petition was filed on a Friday. The second thing we did was contact the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office with a referral package, the falsified death certificates, the evidence of payment to Philip Henning, the documented connection between the certifying officials, retirement funding, and the Voss Family Foundation. Dave Puit, bless him, had been thorough. The third thing, and this is the one I want to tell you about in detail because it matters, was that I went to see Margaret Voss, not to yell, not to make a speech, not because I had anything to prove in that room. I went because there was a 9-year-old boy upstairs who was going to find out very soon that the world he understood was not the world that was. And I wanted Margaret to understand before that happened that she had a choice about how it happened, that she could make it easier for Lucas or harder, and that the path she chose would determine how I characterized her role in this going forward to her grandson. I found her in the family waiting room on the 3rd floor. She was alone. Garrett and Paula had been and gone. She was reading something on her phone and set it face down when I walked in, which meant she had been watching the door. I sat down across from her for a long moment. Neither of us spoke. "How much do you know?" she said finally. "All of it." And she absorbed that. Her face did not crumble. She was 71 years old, and she had built things and managed them and held them together through force of will for 4 decades. And some part of that architecture was still standing even now. "I did what I believed was best for Jennifer," she said. "And for Lucas. You did what was best for Margaret." I kept my voice level. "You did what gave you control over the 2 people Jennifer loved most. You took her son from her, and you took Jennifer from me, and you did it within 4 hours of a delivery while she was sedated. She would have gone back to you. She would have chosen that over everything." "Yes," I said she would have. That was her right. "You took her right." Margaret's jaw tightened. "You had nothing. You had debt and a residency, and I had her. That was enough." A long silence. "There are people in the district attorney's office," she said. And there was a trace of the old boardroom voice, not threatening, just informational. "There are people on the medical board." "There were," I said. "There aren't any more. I know this because I spent the last 4 days making sure I understood exactly what your reach looks like in 2024. I folded my hands. "I also know that Garrett doesn't know the extent of what you did. I know that because I spoke to him yesterday. He knew about the separation. He thought it was mutual, that you had facilitated a clean break. He didn't know about the death certificates. He didn't know about Philip Henning. He was, I have to say, extremely upset to learn otherwise." Margaret closed her eyes briefly. "Here is what is going to happen," I said. "The custody petition has been filed. A criminal referral has been submitted to the DA's office. Those are already in motion, and I cannot stop them, even if I wanted to, which I don't. What I can control is what Lucas is told, and when and how. And that I'm offering you the chance to help decide because you love that boy. I can see that you love him, and whatever else you are, that love is real." She looked at me. For the first time in the years I had known Margaret Voss. This woman who had been composed and calculating and controlled in every interaction we had ever had. She looked old, not frail, just old. The weight of 9 years of maintenance pressing visibly through the armor. "What do you want from me?" she said. "I want you to tell him the truth with me present and with Jennifer on video call. I want him to hear it from you before any court proceeding or legal process makes it ugly. I want you to give him the best version of a terrible thing. And in return, I will tell Karen Aldridge that Lucas's relationship with you is something we are committed to preserving. That whatever happens legally. We are not seeking to remove you from his life. You do that. He loves you. I looked at her steadily. That's not nothing. I know what it's like to lose someone. I'm not going to do that to my son. The waiting room hummed around us. The same television on the same wall. Same local news. Margaret Voss looked at her hands for a very long time. Then she said, "When?" We told Lucas on a Saturday morning. He had been moved from the pediatric neuro unit to a regular recovery room. Good color. Tracking well. The slight headache that follows a procedure like his resolving is the swelling reduced. He was sitting up in bed, watching something on a hospital-provided iPad, when Margaret and I came in together, which made him look up immediately, because I don't think he had seen Margaret uncertain about anything before, and she was very slightly uncertain now. Jennifer was on video call on my phone. I set it on the bedside table propped against the water pitcher so Lucas could see her. He looked at the screen. "Who is that?" "My name is Jennifer," she said. Her voice was carefully steady. "Hi, Lucas." He studied her. 9-year-old boys are perceptive in ways that adults consistently underestimate. "Why are you crying?" "Because I'm happy to see you." She smiled through it. "I've been waiting to talk to you for a long time." Lucas looked at his grandmother. "Grandma, what's happening?" Margaret sat down on the edge of the chair beside his bed. This was the hardest thing she had done in 71 years. And I think she knew it. And I think she did it with more grace than I expected. "Sweetheart," she said, "I need to tell you something true, and I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything." "Okay." "Because some of it is going to be confusing, and some of it is going to make you sad. But all of it ends with you being loved. Do you understand?" Lucas put the iPad down. He nodded. Margaret told him the truth. Not every detail. He was 9. Not a deposition, but the bones of it in plain language without excuse. She had made a decision when he was born that hurt some people. His mother, Jennifer, was alive. His father, Dr. George Rowland, was the man standing at the foot of the bed. They had not been part of his life because of a mistake she had made, and that mistake was hers, and she was sorry. Lucas did not speak for a while after she finished. Then he looked at the phone screen at Jennifer. "You're my mom, yes's baby." He looked at me. "And you're my dad, yes." My voice came out rough at the edges, and I didn't smooth it. "I am." He was quiet again. Processing. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Outside in the corridor, someone was laughing at something. "Did you want me?" he said. The question was directed at both of us at the phone and at the foot of the bed, with the precise, uncluttered directness of a child who doesn't yet know that some questions are supposed to be softened. "More than anything," Jennifer said. "Every single day," I said. Lucas looked down at his hands. His left hand was healing. The IV site was covered with a small bandage, and he'd been picking at the medical tape in the way kids do. He picked at it now. Then he stopped. "I'm not sure how I feel," he said. "That's okay," I told him. "You don't have to know how you feel yet. You have time." He looked up. "Are you going to stay? Are you going to be around?" "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at Margaret. She looked back at him as him, and her expression was something I will not describe in detail, because it belonged to her and to him, not to this story. She reached out and took his hand. He let her. The legal proceedings moved with the weight and efficiency of a case where the documentation leaves very little room for argument. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office opened a criminal investigation into the falsification of vital records. Philip Henning reached in Nevada, where he had relocated after leaving California in 2017, agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. He identified Margaret Voss as the person who had directed and funded the scheme. The retired county official similarly provided a statement. Margaret Voss was charged in April of 2024 with filing false instruments, conspiracy, and obstruction of parental rights under California law. Her attorney negotiated. Margaret was 71 years old, had no prior criminal record, and the prosecution was balanced against the complexity of a trial that would require Lucas to eventually understand exactly what had happened to his family. Karen Aldridge, operating in conjunction with the DA, negotiated a resolution: a guilty plea to 2 felony counts, a suspended sentence given Margaret's age and health, 5 years of supervised probation, a substantial financial restitution order, and the permanent vacation of both falsified death certificates from the public record. Jennifer Marie Voss was officially and finally alive. The civil litigation ran concurrently. Margaret, on Karen's advice, did not contest the paternity establishment or the custody arrangement. It was agreed that Lucas would live with me in Los Angeles. I had already moved to a house in Pasadena, a neighborhood I had always liked for its wide streets and reasonable proximity to the hospital. With Jennifer relocating from Sacramento to join us as we rebuilt what 9 years had interrupted, Margaret Voss retained visiting rights, weekly supervised initially, then at Lucas's discretion as he grew older. I'm going to be honest. There were people in my life who thought this was too generous. Renee called it absurdly decent. My father, when I told him, was quiet for a long moment and then said, "Your mother would be proud of you," which is not the same as agreeing with me. But Harold Rowland has always understood the value of saying the right thing. My position was simple. Lucas loved his grandmother. Children do not unlove the people who raised them simply because those people turn out to have done something unforgivable. I had spent 9 years losing things. I was not going to build my son's new life on more loss if I could prevent it. But I also want to be clear about what justice looked like in this story, because I know some of you are listening for it. Margaret Voss pleaded guilty to 2 felonies. She stands convicted of falsifying death records in the state of California. That conviction is public record. Her name, the charges, and the plea are documented in the Los Angeles County Superior Court system and are accessible to anyone who looks. The Voss Family Foundation, whose board she had chaired since Walter's death, requested her resignation in May of 2024. She resigned. The foundation subsequently made a significant contribution to the hospital's pediatric neurology unit. That too is public record. I am not going to pretend there wasn't a specific quiet satisfaction in watching the unit bear a new donor plaque in a department where Jennifer's falsified death had been processed. Philip Henning was disbarred from ever holding a healthcare administrative position again. The retired county official's pension was reviewed. These are not cinematic satisfactions. They are not a speech at a courtroom door or a dramatic confrontation with reporters outside a courthouse. They are the specific grinding consequences of being held accountable by systems that occasionally, with enough documentation and a good attorney, actually work. And the Voss family's medical board connections. The people Margaret had implied she could mobilize against my career in 2016. I had spent 8 years becoming the kind of surgeon whose record makes a politically motivated complaint vanish under scrutiny. The threat was real once. By 2024, it was a museum piece. Jennifer moved to Pasadena in June of 2024. We were not the same people who had fallen in love at a conference in Santa Monica in 2015. Nobody is the same person after 9 years of the particular kind of living we had each done. She had rebuilt herself in Sacramento with a quietness and a self-sufficiency that she wore differently than the woman I remembered. I had rebuilt myself in Los Angeles with a precision and a reserve that she recognized without my having to explain. We were careful with each other, careful in the good way, the way you are with something you know has value. Lucas, for his part, approached the reorganization of his world with a pragmatism that astonished me and made complete sense when I remembered that 9-year-old boys are fundamentally problem solvers, presented with insufficient information about the problems they're solving. Within the first week at the Pasadena house, he had established that my coffee was too strong, the house needed a dog, and he wanted to learn chess. I already have a dog, I told him. Murphy. He considered Murphy sprawled across the kitchen floor like a golden rug with opinions and said, "Okay, he counts. Very gracious of you. Can we still get a second one?" Jennifer from across the kitchen said. "Absolutely not," and then looked at me with an expression that said, "Do not encourage this." And I did not encourage it, which was very mature of me. I taught him chess on Sunday afternoons on the back porch. He was appalling at it for 3 weeks, and then abruptly, alarmingly good. He had that specific quality, the capacity for genuine focus when something interested him, that I recognized without wanting to say it out loud, because saying it felt like the kind of sentiment that belongs in a greeting card rather than a real life. In September of 2024, Lucas started 4th grade at McKinley School in Pasadena, a public school, because I had grown up in Riverside public schools and turned out fine, a point I made to Jennifer, who pointed out that fine was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. He made friends quickly. He joined the after-school science club. He got in exactly one argument with a kid named Trevor about whether black holes could theoretically exist inside other black holes, which his science teacher told me at the first parent-teacher conference I have ever attended in my life was the most animated I have ever seen a 9-year-old about theoretical astrophysics. He gets that from his mother, I said. Jennifer, sitting beside me, said he absolutely does not. There is a moment I want to tell you about. It happened on a Sunday in October of 2024, 4 months after Lucas came to live with us, 3 months after Jennifer moved to Pasadena. We were at Eaton Canyon, a nature area in the foothills east of the city, where there is a waterfall trail that is about 3-mile round trip and is entirely achievable for a 9-year-old who has recovered from neurosurgery and considers himself athletically accomplished, which Lucas absolutely did. We were about halfway up the trail when Lucas, who had been hiking ahead of us with Murphy pulling the leash, stopped and waited for us to catch up. He looked at Jennifer. He looked at me. He had something on his mind. I could see it in the particular way he was holding his mouth. What I said. He looked at the trail. I was thinking about something. "Okay, Grandma did a bad thing," he said. It was a statement, not a question. He had been processing this in stages for months, bringing pieces of it out when he was ready, in the way children do. Like a really bad thing. "Yes," Jennifer said. "She did, but you said she's still my grandma." "She is," I said. He was quiet for a moment. A dog on the trail behind us barked at something in the brush, and Murphy tried to respond, and Lucas held the leash without being told. "Can you love someone and still think what they did was wrong?" Jennifer looked at me, then at Lucas. "Yes," she said. "That's one of the harder things about being a person. But yes, you can hold both of those at the same time." He thought about it. "Okay." he said, as if he'd been waiting for confirmation of something he'd already worked out. That's what I thought. He turned and continued up the trail, Murphy bounding ahead of him, and Jennifer took my hand on the path, and we followed our son up toward the waterfall, with the San Gabriel Mountains rising above us in the October light. I have held a lot of things at the same time in my life. The scalpel and the grief, the career and the loss, the love that survived 9 years of a manufactured silence. But this, walking that trail, watching that boy, holding Jennifer's hand, this I did not have to hold carefully. This I could just carry without dropping it. Margaret Voss died in January of 2025, 6 months after her plea. Her heart, which had been reliable for 71 years, finally ran out of runway. She died at home in San Marino with Garrett and Paula beside her. Lucas was there too. We drove him out that Friday evening because he asked to go. And he is not our child in the sense that we decide things for him. He is our child in the sense that we are present for the things he decides. He sat with her for an hour before she lost consciousness. I do not know what he said. It was his to say, at her request. There was no service. There is a marker at Live Oak Memorial Park in Arcadia. Not far, as it happens, from the stone with 2 names that has since been legally amended. Jennifer's name removed, replaced with an inscription that reads simply, "In memory of those who were never lost, only separated." That was Jennifer's idea. I thought it was right. Garrett Voss called me in February of 2025. We had spoken several times since April of 2024, navigating the family trust restructuring that the criminal proceedings had necessitated. Those were business conversations. This was different. "George," he said, "I owe you something." "You don't." I knew something was wrong in 2016. I knew my mother had done something. I didn't know the extent of it, but I didn't ask either. "That's on me." He paused. "I wanted you to know I know that." I thought about that for a moment. "How's Paula good?" She's good. Garrett Jr. is 12 now. Thinks he's 16. Lucas thinks he's 14. It must be contagious." He laughed. The first genuine laugh I had heard from Garrett Voss. "Bring him to a Dodger game sometime," Garrett said. "I've got season tickets. He'll take you up on that. Consider yourself warned." I want to tell you the last thing that happened. The thing I think about when I'm in the car, between the hospital and the house in Pasadena and the city, is doing that thing it does at dusk in California, where everything turns ampy, and even the freeway looks like something someone painted with good intentions. It was a Sunday morning in March of 2025. Lucas was 10 by then. He had been with us for 9 months, long enough for the house to feel like it had always been arranged around him, which is the particular magic of children, and also their particular audacity. He came downstairs at 7:30 in the morning, too early for a Sunday, not early enough for a surgeon, and found me in the kitchen with coffee I had made correctly. "Thank you," and sat down across from me with the focused expression that meant he had been thinking about something since he woke up. "Dad," he said. That word 9 months in, and it still did something to my chest. I kept my face normal. "Yeah, in surgery," he said. "When you're operating on someone's brain, can you tell what they're like? Like as a person?" I considered the question seriously because he asked it seriously. "No, the brain is remarkable, but it doesn't work like that. You can see the function, which areas light up, which pathways are intact. But the personality, the memories, the self, that's not visible on a table." He nodded. "But you still try to save it. Always." He was quiet for a moment. Murphy came in from the hallway, and settled under the table with the authority of someone who has been in this kitchen longer than anyone and intends everyone to remember it. "I want to be a doctor," Lucas said. I looked at him. "Yeah, or a pilot." He considered. One of those big gap between those two. "I know." He reached down to scratch Murphy's ear. "I'll figure it out." Jennifer came downstairs 20 minutes later, found us both at the table with coffee. Mine real, his technically hot chocolate with aspirations, and looked between us with the expression she gets when she can tell something was said that she missed and is deciding whether to ask. "What?" "She said he's going to be a doctor," I said. "Or a pilot," Lucas said. Jennifer sat down, wrapped her hands around her mug, and looked at the two of us across the kitchen table on a Sunday morning in March in Pasadena. California, outside. The magnolia were doing something beautiful on the parkway, the kind of morning that didn't ask anything of you. "Both," she said. "Why not both?" "My name is George Rowland. I am 43 years old. I live in Pasadena, California, with a woman I fell in love with at a conference in Santa Monica in 2015, and a son I met 9 years late, and a golden retriever who considers himself the senior member of this household, and is frankly not wrong. I spent 9 years standing over other people's children with steady hands, saving lives that weren't mine to grieve. It turns out that's exactly the kind of practice that prepares you for the life you actually want. I am not going to tell you I've forgiven Margaret Voss. Forgiveness is a complicated country, and I am still working on my documentation. What I will tell you is this. I understand now that grief makes people capable of things that their best selves would not recognize. That love, the frightened, possessive, controlling kind that Margaret had for Jennifer, is still love, even when it is also a crime. That understanding does not excuse what she did. It just makes it human. And human in my line of work is always worth more than the alternative. The grave with 2 names was a lie. It was a document manufactured in a window of opportunity by a woman who believed she was protecting something by destroying everything else. It cost me 9 years. It cost Jennifer 9 years. It cost Lucas the first 9 years of knowing who he was made of. But I want to tell you the last thing I've learned from surgery because I think it applies. The brain is the most complicated thing that exists. It contains more connections than there are stars in the Milky Way. It stores everything, every face, every voice, every year of accumulated experience in architecture so intricate that we have been studying it for centuries and are still surprised by what it does. And it heals. Not perfectly, not without leaving a trace. There is always something, a scar in the imaging, a pathway that runs slightly differently than it did before. But the function returns. The connections rebuild. The parts of the self that once seemed permanently lost have a remarkable tendency, given enough time, the right conditions, and people patient enough to stay, to find their way back to one another. That's something medical school teaches you in textbooks, but textbooks only explain the biology. Life teaches you the rest. Healing is rarely dramatic. It doesn't happen all at once because someone decides they're ready. It happens quietly, almost invisibly, through hundreds of ordinary mornings that don't feel especially different from the one before them, until one day you realize you've become someone who no longer measures every moment against what was lost. I've spent decades standing beside operating tables watching damaged nerves slowly recover function. At first, there's nothing. Then the smallest response, a slight movement, a flicker where there had only been silence. Weeks later, that movement becomes strength. Months later, the patient walks into my office using muscles everyone feared might never respond again. Medicine, calls it recovery. I've always thought gratitude is a better word. The body spends every day trying to return to wholeness if we simply give it the chance. People aren't as different from that as we imagine. We tell ourselves some parts of us are gone forever. Trust, joy, hope, the ability to laugh without feeling guilty. Then, slowly, they begin returning when we stop demanding they arrive all at once. My kitchen in Pasadena has become the place where I remember that lesson. Every morning, the coffee maker starts before sunrise. The first light slips through the east-facing windows and lands across the wooden table exactly the way it has for years. There was a time when that table held unopened mail, unfinished conversations, and the quiet weight of questions I didn't know how to answer. Now it usually holds a newspaper, a coffee mug, and enough silence to let the day begin honestly. Funny how the same table can become an entirely different place simply because the people sitting around it have changed. Sometimes I'm alone there for 20 peaceful minutes before the rest of the house wakes. I used to think solitude and loneliness were the same thing. They aren't. Loneliness is wishing someone were there. Solitude is appreciating the chance to hear yourself think. After everything that happened, I learned to value both. There are mornings when neighbors wave through the kitchen window during their walks. Mornings when family stops by unexpectedly because they know the coffee is always fresh. Mornings when nothing at all happens except another ordinary sunrise. I've come to believe those are the richest mornings of all. Extraordinary moments are memorable because they're rare. Ordinary moments become meaningful because they keep returning. Consistency has a quiet kind of grace. Looking back, I don't think healing arrived the day everything was finally resolved. I think it arrived much later. On a Tuesday morning I can't even place on a calendar anymore, when I poured coffee without replaying the past before taking the first sip. That's how recovery usually announces itself, not with celebration, with absence. The absence of fear, the absence of anger, the absence of the exhausting need to explain yourself one more time. You simply notice that your shoulders aren't carrying what they used to carry. The weight didn't disappear overnight. You just became strong enough to finally set it down. Every now and then someone asks me how long recovery takes. I always give the same answer. Longer than you hope, shorter than you fear. Bodies heal that way. Hearts do too. The important thing is creating the conditions where healing has somewhere to happen. Patience, honesty, rest, good people, a table worth sitting at, a reason to come home. Those things matter more than we often realize while we're busy chasing larger victories. The greatest triumph isn't proving someone else wrong. It's discovering you still recognize yourself when the difficult years are finally behind you. I know because I've watched it happen under bright operating room lights, where skill and science quietly give people another chance. I also know because, every morning in my kitchen in Pasadena, I watch it happen again in much smaller ways. A conversation, a laugh, a familiar routine, a life that no longer feels like it's waiting to begin. But the function returns. The connections rebuild. The parts of the self that seemed most permanently lost have a tendency, given the right conditions and enough time, to find their way back to each other. I know, because I have watched it happen on the table. I know, because I am watching it happen at my kitchen table every morning in Pasadena, every single day. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.